Hey guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. If you guys are new here, welcome. And if you guys have already been subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for subscribing. Today's video is all about alter ego. And today we're going to tackle one palette and that is called Blooms. I had never tested out alter ego before. And as far as I know, most of their palettes are around $16. At least the ones that I have bought. So I have Blooms palette, I have Canyon palette, I have Goddess palette, and I have Sahara palette. Now, why did I go ham? I don't know. But let me tell you the story behind it. I was waiting for Goddess palette to come back in stock, which dupes Natasha Denona's gold palette. And I was looking for a neutral palette in my collection. As you guys all know, I was talking about that for a long time. And I was also eyeing Natasha Denona Bieber palette for a long time. But it retails for $129 if I'm not mistaken. So alter ego had a dupe for $16 and I got that. So both of these palette was the initial palette that I got. Soon after, I mean the next day, as soon as I ordered, they released Natasha Denona's bronze dupe and Love Palette dupe. I mean, who could say no to those dupes, right? So I got Canyon and Blooms too. Today's video is going to all surround around Blooms palette, but let me just show it to you guys. This is the Canyon palette, which dupes Natasha Denona's gold palette, and Natasha Denona's Love palette, which is duped by the Blooms palette. I will show the swatches on the screen so that you can see it for yourself. But today's video, let's tackle about the Blooms palette. Now, I love both the thought process behind it. I mean, Natasha Denona's Love palette, like the shade names are all related to like passion and commitment and lifetime. You know, all those like relationship, love kind of theme. But the alter ego Blooms palette is surrounding around flowers, which totally makes sense for both the companies, I would say. This palette comes in a beautiful unicarton. And I am a fan of this. I mean, this by no means feels like cheap or anything. I really want to save this unicarton because it's that pretty. The same thing is replicated in their palette itself. So it comes with the same kind of a packaging. It's a magnetic closure. It comes with a huge mirror and all the shades. Now let's move on to the swatches. The first shade in the palette is called Peony. The second shade is called Azalea. The third shade is called Daisy. The fourth shade is called Kala. And the last shade in the first row is called Black Dahlia. In the second row, the first shade is called Snapdragon. Then we have Fuchsia, Petunia, Lily, and Lush. In the third row, we have Violet, Orchid, Petal, Rose, and Hibiscus. In the future videos, I'm going to talk about all these palettes, and also I'm going to do a 5 looks with one palette. If you want to see how I achieve this look, it would be at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that too. Now let's move on to the dupe shades. So I'm going to insert Natasha Denona's Love palette and my Blooms palette, and I'm going to say which shade duplicates which shade. Alter ego also has duped the formulas too. So the shade called Black Dahlia from this palette, this shade and the shade called Orchid, both of them are cream to powder finish, similarly as in the Natasha Denona's Love palette. So in the Natasha Denona Love palette, the first shade is called First, which is duped by Petal from Blooms palette. The second shade is called Lifetime, which is duped by Kala from Blooms palette. The third shade is called Heartbeat, which is duped by Lush from Blooms palette. The fourth shade is called Transparent, which is duped by Lily from Blooms palette. The fifth shade is called Commitment, which is duped by Black Dahlia from Blooms palette. Moving on to the next row, Trust is duped by Violet from the Blooms palette. Heart is duped by Rose from the Blooms palette. Giving is duped by Petunia from the Blooms palette. Pure Love is duped by Fuchsia from the Blooms palette. And Blind is duped by Daisy from the Blooms palette. Now moving on to the last row, Soul is duped by Snapdragon from the Blooms palette. Passion is duped by Hibiscus from the Blooms palette. Intense is duped by Azalea from the Blooms palette. Valentine is duped by Peony from the Blooms palette. Dream is duped by Orchid from the Blooms palette. So I am absolutely thrilled to try all the other shades. I was eyeing Natasha Denona's bronze dupe, and I had mentioned that in my wish list for 2021, the brands that I want to try. If you have not seen that video, I'll leave it in the eye cards above. I mean, I was drooling over the Natasha Denona bronze palette, so this palette totally made sense. So does all the other palettes, I would say. So without further ado, let's move on to the tutorial. So on my eyes, I've primed with my Wet n Wild Photo Focus Eye Primer, and then I just dusted off with my Maybelline's Fit Me Loose powder on top of that, so that I can have a smooth base for the shadows to blend on top of that. Now first, I'm going to take the shade called Peony on my crease, and I'm going to blend it all as a transition shade. Windshield wiper and circular motions. Next, I'm going to take the shade called Snapdragon, and I'm going to apply it from the middle of my eye to the outer corner of the eye, and then slowly blend it onto my crease. This is a beautiful mauvey brown shade. As you can see, it gives a lot more like deep pink vibe on the eyes. Now next, I wanted a little more red on my eyes. So I'm taking the shade called Rose from the palette, which is the matte red. And that is what I'm applying on my outer corners and blending it on my crease. And now I'm cutting a half cut crease on my eyes, and I'm using my CoverGirl's True Blend Concealer, and I am in the shade Sand Beige. I'm just blending the center of my eyelid just with the shade called Snapdragon, so that there's no harsh edges when we apply our lid shade. Now for our lid shade, first I'm going to take the shade called Petunia from the palette. This is an amazing pink gold shimmer. I absolutely loved this shade in the palette, and this is what I have on the center of my eyelid. And towards the inner third of my eyelid, I'm taking the shade called Kala from the palette, which is a more of like a peachy champagne shimmer, and I'm applying that on my inner third. I'm going to apply the same shade called Snapdragon on my lower lash line and Kala on my inner third of my lower lash line. And for my inner corners, I'm going to take the shade called Lily from the palette, which is a light champagne shade. And that's my final look. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Let's talk about the palette and final thoughts. I really loved playing with this palette, and of course this is my first impression, this is my first look, but I had played with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades from this palette. So 1/3 of the palette I've already tested out, and I basically feel like this is an awesome palette to work with. I don't want to like jump the gun and say like this is my favorite palette, but I think for duping Natasha Denona's Love Palette, if you were looking at the similar color story and that palette like jumped onto you, but you were just hesitant because of the price point, I feel you will not be disappointed with this palette at all. I know that this is a dupe for Natasha Denona palette, but they have rearranged all the shadows and given us those color shades in a lesser cost, which I think is amazing. Now, if they were duping, let's say Wet n Wild palettes, or if they were duping like every other shadows that were coming in the market, I would feel a little edgy about it. But I feel that if you cannot like afford a $65 palette or a $129 palette, a $16 dupe for that, I mean, I don't think it hurts anybody. When I swatched this palette, because I do not own the Natasha Denona Love Palette, so when I swatched this, I think the only shade that is a little disappointing is this shade, and this is called Orchid. It doesn't come as punchy purple when you swatch it on your hands, but I've not applied this on my eyes today, so can't talk much about it, but I will definitely do a 5 looks with this palette where I will use all the shades, and then I'll give you my detailed review on top of it. So you can imagine that in like a future video. But today I definitely wanted to talk about this palette. I wanted to just give you an in-depth review about this palette. Now this palette retails for $16, whereas the Natasha Denona Love Palette is for $65. So price-wise, this is an amazing palette to have. You have seen the swatches on the screen. I mean, I feel they have like really worked onto this palette to get the dupes. Now I've not tested that whether you can like take off these pans and rearrange it or not. I don't think you can do that, but I will definitely test it out and I will leave it on the screen that if you can rearrange it and if there's like a magnetic sheet behind it. I mean, I would love that because I would love to rearrange it just like the Natasha Denona's Love Palette and keep it with me. And I personally feel that this would be a great travel palette. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this Valentine's-y pink Natasha Denona Love inspired, blooms inspired look. So all of these palettes review would be coming up in my future videos. So if you were curious about Natasha Denona's dupes and if you were curious how Alter Ego performs, you can find it. Do subscribe to my channel to find out whether if they do live to the expectations or not. But I am pretty like excited about the Blooms palette. I can say that for sure. If you guys want to see 5 looks with this palette, please do leave it down in the comment section below. I'll be happy to film it for you guys. But for today, this is what you're gonna get. If you guys liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and ring the notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 AM Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.